Light beyond eyes. The storm that had been brewing for months inside the Remington mansion finally reached its breaking point. Charles stood in the nursery doorway, his face shadowed by anger but also by something deeper, a fear he could not name. Maya stood firm, trembling but unyielding, her body angled protectively in front of Laya, who clung to her with a desperation that pierced even Charles's hardened exterior. For a moment no one spoke. The silence was not empty, it was heavy, filled with all the years of Charles's control, all of Maya's hidden strength, and all of Laya's fragile hope pressing together in one impossible collision. It was Laya who broke the silence, her small voice carrying more weight than all the shouting that had come before. "Daddy," she whispered, her blind eyes shimmering with tears and something more. "Don't take her away." I saw it, I felt it. It wasn't just in my head this time. Maya made it real. She gave me light. Charles's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. He wanted to dismiss it as childish imagination, as nothing more than wishful thinking. But something in his daughter's voice stopped him. It wasn't the whining plea of a spoiled child or the trembling fear of one cowed by authority. It was conviction pure and unshakable. For the first time, his daughter spoke not as the fragile treasure he sought to protect, but as a soul demanding to be heard. Maya turned then, her eyes locking onto his. "You can hate me, sir. You can cast me out, punish me, ruin me if you wish. But you cannot deny what just happened. You can't cage her anymore. She deserves more than walls and rules. She deserves to live." The word struck him harder than any insult ever could, because in his heart Charles knew the truth. His love, meant to protect, had instead become a prison. He had built walls so high and so thick that even the sun could not touch his daughter. And now, faced with the possibility that she had glimpsed something he could never give her, he felt powerless. For a man like Charles, powerlessness was unbearable. He turned his gaze to Laya, kneeling before her with an unfamiliar softness breaking through the hardness of his features. "You truly felt light, my darling." "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "It's not dark anymore. It's not just dark. I think I'm not broken." The words shattered him. For years he had poured everything into convincing himself that she was whole even without sight. Yet somehow his endless protection had convinced her otherwise, that she was broken. Hearing her say it now broke open the walls of his heart in a way nothing else could. His hands shook as he reached for her. "You were never broken, Laya, never. His voice cracked, the control he had worn for so long slipping away. "I didn't know how to love you without being afraid." Maya watched, tears blurring her vision as father and daughter clung to one another. For the first time since entering the mansion, she saw Charles not as a towering figure of wealth and anger, but as a man, flawed, frightened, desperate to love, but too afraid to lose. It did not erase his cruelty, but it cracked through the armor of his pride, and in that crack, light poured in. The days that followed were not easy. Charles did not transform overnight, nor did Laya wake one morning with perfect vision restored. The doctors still shook their heads, still spoke of limitations, still measured progress with charts and lights, but something had changed forever in that nursery, something that no medical report could deny. Laya no longer lived as though bound by her blindness. She no longer whispered apologies for being different, no longer shrank under the weight of her father's control. She sang openly, laughed freely, and walked through the gardens with Maya's hand in hers, unafraid of the world she could not see. And Charles, though still stern and proud, began to yield in small ways. He allowed Maya to remain, not as a servant relegated to the kitchen, but as Laya's companion and aide. He did not admit it aloud, not at first, but he could not deny that his daughter thrived in Maya's presence. He could not deny that the impossible moment in that nursery had ignited something in both of them that was greater than fear. Maya, for her part, no longer questioned why she had been brought into this house. She no longer wondered if she was meant to stay silent and invisible. She knew now that her hands, her words, her very presence carried a light that could not be diminished by wealth or hierarchy. She had been given a calling, and she had answered it. Months later, as winter gave way to spring, the Remington estate looked outwardly unchanged. The marble walls still gleamed, the garden still flourished, and Charles still conducted his empire with relentless ambition. But within those walls something had shifted forever. For on one quiet morning, as sunlight streamed through the nursery window, Laya sat beside Maya and whispered with a trembling smile, Maya, I see shadows now. Shapes. It's small, but it's real. The dark isn't whole anymore. Tears filled Maya's eyes as she pulled the child close, her heart swelling with awe and gratitude. It's more than enough, sweetheart. It's the beginning. Charles, who had entered silently behind them, stood frozen. For the first time in his life, he did not reach to control, did not bark orders or demand explanations. Instead, he stepped forward, resting a hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. His voice, stripped of its sharpness, carried only reverence. It's a miracle, Laya, and sometimes miracles don't come from power or money. They come from love. In that moment, the walls of the mansion no longer felt like a cage. They felt like a home where light had finally been let in, not through windows or chandeliers, but through the courage of a maid who refused to turn away, the hope of a child who longed for more, and the surrender of a father who finally chose love over fear. And so, though the world would still call Laya blind, within those walls she lived with a vision clearer than most who walked in daylight. She saw beyond eyes, beyond darkness, beyond control. She saw love, and that was the brightest light of all. For several long moments, Maya held her breath as she kept the damp cloth pressed gently against Laya's closed eyelids. The child's face was tilted toward the sky, her pale lashes trembling, her lips parted in a fragile expression of awe. The garden, so often only another ornamental piece of the Remington estate, seemed transformed in that moment into something sacred. The air itself was alive with the possibility of something extraordinary. The sound of the fountain's trickle blended with the rustle of leaves, as though the entire world had hushed to witness the small miracle taking place. Maya's heart thundered in her chest, a mix of fear and hope she could not contain. She wanted to believe desperately that what Laya was feeling was more than imagination, more than the hungry dreams of a blind child longing for sight. But she also knew the weight of disappointment could crush a soul so young. She had seen disappointment in her mother's face too many times, the bitter edge of promises broken by circumstance and by poverty. She could not bear to see that same shadow fall over Laya's features. Does it really feel different? Maya asked softly, her voice trembling with both awe and caution. Laya nodded slowly, her small fingers tightening around Maya's wrist, as though afraid the sensation would slip away if she let go. It's like the dark isn't so heavy, like something warm is trying to shine through. I don't see anything yet, not really. But I feel it. I feel like tears burned the back of Maya's eyes. She did not know what to say. Words felt both too heavy and too small for what had just been spoken. She pressed her forehead briefly against the crown of the child's hair, inhaling the faint scent of lavender from her ribbons. Then maybe, Maya whispered, maybe light has always been inside you. Laya, maybe today you just noticed it for the first time. The little girl smiled then, a small trembling smile that carried the weight of hope she had been denied all her life. But just as quickly the fragile piece shattered. The crunch of approaching footsteps froze Maya in place. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat, and saw the unmistakable silhouette of Charles Remington striding down the gravel path toward them. His tall figure cut against the dying light of the afternoon, and even from a distance his presence radiated fury. Maya, Laya whispered, clutching at her hand in fear. Maya rose to her feet quickly, her fingers still entangled with the child's. She knew what this must look like, what it always looked like. A servant overstepping, daring to touch what was untouchable. She wanted to step away to protect herself, but she could not bring herself to let go of Laya's hand. The girl held on too tightly, her grip as desperate as her heart. Charles's voice came before he even reached them, deep and sharp, slicing the air. What did I say about touching my daughter? Laya flinched, but Maya stood her ground. Her knees trembled beneath her skirt. Her pulse raced, but something deeper than fear rooted her to that spot. She had endured his anger once, endured his threats, but this time was different. This time she had felt the spark of something she could not ignore. The possibility that kindness, not control, might awaken something in this child's darkened world. Her eyes hurt again, Maya said, her voice steady though her hands shook. I was only trying to help. I don't pay you to help, Charles snapped, his steps crunching closer, his steel gray eyes blazing. I pay you to obey. Do you understand the difference? Maya swallowed hard, but before she could reply, Laya spoke up, her small voice trembling yet firm. Daddy, please. She didn't hurt me. She made it better. It felt like light. Charles faltered for a fraction of a second, just enough for Maya to see the shadow of doubt flicker across his face. But it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, buried beneath the weight of his pride and fear. He crouched to his daughter's level, his hand brushing her hair back from her face. "Sweetheart, you don't know what you're saying. You're too young to understand. People like her can't help you. Only doctors can. Only I can keep you safe." Laya shook her head stubbornly, clinging tighter to Maya's hand. "But she did help me, I felt it. I want her to stay." The defiance in her tone startled them both. Charles straightened slowly, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on Maya with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the ground. Yet even as he glared, Maya noticed something else in his expression, something unspoken, hidden beneath the armor of his anger. It was fear. Not fear of Maya, but fear of losing control over the one thing he valued most. "You will return to the house immediately," he said coldly to Maya. "If I find you with her again outside of your duties, your employment here will end that very moment. Do I make myself clear?" Maya hesitated, her throat tight, but she forced herself to nod. "Yes, sir." "Good." He reached for Laya's hand, prying it from Maya's grasp. The child resisted at first, but Charles's grip was firm, final. As he led her away, Laya turned her head back, her blind eyes wide with something between sorrow and determination. "Don't leave me, Maya," she whispered, her voice carried away on the wind. Maya stood frozen in the garden long after they had gone, her hands trembling, her heart breaking. She knew she should pack her things that night, should spare herself the humiliation of waiting for Charles to cast her out. Yet when she returned to her small room, she did not reach for her suitcase. Instead, she sank onto the edge of her bed and let the tears fall freely. Her mother's words echoed in her mind again. "Our hands carry light, baby. Don't let anyone tell you different." Maya had always thought of those words as comfort, but now they felt like a calling. She had seen the truth in Laya's face, heard it in her trembling voice. Something had changed. Something had begun. And no matter how tightly Charles locked the doors, no matter how fiercely he clung to his fortress of control, Maya knew she could not turn away. She could not walk out of the mansion and leave that child behind. Not now. That night, as she lay awake listening to the silence of the basement corridors, a fragile flame of determination took root in her chest. She did not know what the future would hold. She did not know how long she could withstand Charles's wrath. But she knew this much. Leah Remington deserved more than fear. She deserved freedom, hope, and perhaps even the impossible. And for the first time since stepping foot into the Remington mansion, Maya felt certain that she had not come here by accident. She had been placed in this house in this child's life for a reason. The world might call her the help, but in her heart Maya knew she carried something far greater than that title. She carried the chance to ignite light in the deepest darkness. A dangerous decision. The storm that had been building inside the Remington mansion finally began to spill into the open. Weeks had passed since the incident in the garden. Weeks in which Maya had been watched more closely than ever. Weeks in which Charles had tightened the rules around his daughter's life with a grip that threatened to choke even the faintest hope of freedom. Yet despite his efforts, something had already changed in Laya, something Charles could not undo. She had tasted the warmth of trust that Maya carried in her hands, and though she still obeyed her father outwardly, inwardly she began to resist. Every day, she longed for Maya's voice. Every day she whispered to herself the descriptions of color and sound that Maya had once given her, words she clung to as if they were treasures. And every night when Charles locked her in the safety of her nursery and kissed her goodnight with his possessive affection, she would curl against her doll and remember the moment when her eyes had felt something beyond darkness. To Charles, she was still the fragile treasure he guarded obsessively, but in her heart, she was no longer simply his possession. She was beginning to dream of freedom, and those dreams always had Maya's face at the center. Maya, meanwhile, bore the weight of both hope and fear. Her days were long and grueling, filled with kitchen work, laundry, and endless small humiliations delivered by Mrs. Leeds, who seemed to take pleasure in reminding her of her lowly status. Yet even those punishments did not compare to the torment of knowing that Laya needed her, yet she could not be near her openly. The stolen moments were fewer now, each one snatched like a crumb dropped from a guarded table. A brief whisper in the hall, a hurried squeeze of a hand, A lullaby hummed from a distance that carried faintly through the nursery door. It was not enough, but it was all they had. The breaking point came one autumn evening when the air outside was sharp with the scent of rain and the mansion glowed with golden lamplight. Maya had just finished her shift in the kitchen when she heard it, a cry, faint but unmistakable, drifting down the corridor from the east wing. Her heart seized instantly. She knew that voice. She knew it too well. Without thinking, she dropped the cloth she had been folding and hurried toward the sound. She found Laya sitting on the nursery floor, her hands pressed against her eyes, her small body trembling. The doll lay forgotten beside her, and her blind eyes were red, the lids swollen with irritation. "It burns," she cried, her voice breaking. "Daddy, it burns." But Charles was not there. Neither was Mrs. Leeds. The room was empty except for the child. And before Maya could weigh the risk, before she could remind herself of the punishments she had been warned about, she was at Laya's side, kneeling beside her with hands that shook but did not falter. "Sweetheart, it's all right," she whispered urgently. "I'm here. Let me help." Laya reached for her blindly, her small hands gripping Maya's apron with desperation. "Maya, please. It hurts so much." I can't make it stop." Maya pulled the cloth from her pocket, dipped it quickly into the basin of water near the window, and pressed it against the child's eyes, just as she had done that first day. Laya's body sagged with relief, her trembling easing as the coolness soothed the rawness. "It's going to be all right," Maya whispered, rocking her gently as though she were her own child. "You're safe now." But even as she said it, she knew it was not true. Because in that very moment the door opened, and Charles Remington stood in the threshold. The sight before him, the servant cradling his daughter, her hands pressed against Laya's face, ignited a rage deeper than anything Maya had yet seen. His eyes burned with fury, his jaw tightened to stone. "What did I tell you?" he thundered, his voice shaking the walls. "What did I tell you about touching her?" Maya's instinct was to drop the cloth, to step back, to cower as she had done before. But this time something inside her refused to yield. She rose slowly to her feet, her hand still holding Laya protectively, and met his gaze head-on. Her heart raced, her knees threatened to give way, but her voice came steady, stronger than she thought possible. "She was in pain," Maya said. "And you weren't here?" "No one was." "What was I supposed to do? Stand by and let her suffer because I'm just the help?" Charles took a step forward, his fury like a physical force. "You dare speak to me that way in my own house?" "Yes," Maya said, her voice trembling but unbroken. "Because your daughter is not a possession. She is a child, and no amount of money, no number of guards or locked doors can protect her from what she truly needs. She needs more than walls and rules. She needs to be seen, even if her eyes don't work. She needs to be loved without fear." For a moment silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Charles's face was red with rage, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But in Laya's small, trembling voice, the silence cracked. "Daddy, please don't yell." "She helped me. She always helps me." The words struck Charles harder than Maya's defiance. He looked down at his daughter, whose blind eyes were wet with both pain and tears, and something flickered in his expression, something that might have been doubt, or fear, or even shame. But he crushed it quickly, replacing it with the iron mask he always wore. "Maya," he said coldly, his voice low and lethal. "Pack your things. You're finished here." Laya's cry split the air. "No, Daddy, no." She clung to Maya, her small arms wrapped around her waist as though she could physically stop her father from tearing them apart. "Don't send her away, please. I need her." But Charles did not bend. His jaw was locked, his eyes merciless. "This ends tonight." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a stone. She knew she should beg, should plead, should fight for her job and her wages and the medicine her mother still needed. But when she opened her eyes again, she did not speak to Charles. She spoke to Laya, bending down to press her forehead against the child's. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered, "and no matter what happens, you will never be alone. Do you understand me?" "Never," Laya sobbed, clinging tighter. Charles's shadow loomed over them, a man who thought his wealth could command the world. Yet in that moment he looked less like a giant and more like a man terrified of losing the one thing he loved most. And in Maya's heart, a decision formed, dangerous, reckless, but unshakable. If Charles would not let her stay, then she would find another way. She would not abandon this child to a prison of fear. She would not walk away. She would risk everything, even her freedom, to protect the fragile light she had begun to see flickering in Laya's soul. Because sometimes, the most dangerous decision is also the only right one. The impossible moment. The night after Maya was dismissed, the Remington mansion became a fortress of silence. Charles believed that by cutting her away, he had severed the dangerous influence that threatened his control over his daughter. He reassured himself that he had acted as any father would, protecting what was most precious. Yet as he sat alone in his study, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound books and the glow of a half-finished glass of bourbon, unease gnawed at him. Laya had not eaten her dinner. She had refused to sing her bedtime songs, and when he kissed her forehead before locking the nursery door, she whispered only one word, "Maya." It echoed in his mind long after the mansion settled into uneasy sleep. Maya, meanwhile, had been escorted to her small room and told to pack her belongings by morning. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the suitcase that lay open but empty. Her hands trembled, not from fear of poverty, though losing this job meant her mother's medicine would once again be uncertain, but from the thought of leaving Laya behind. Every instinct told her to accept her fate, to survive by silence as she had always done. Yet something stronger pulled at her, something she could not suppress. It was as though the child's voice was still inside her, whispering that plea, "Don't leave me." She remembered her mother's words, spoken years ago when illness first began to shadow their lives. "There will be moments, Maya, when the world will try to tell you your love doesn't matter. When that happens, listen closer. Love is the only thing that matters." And for the first time, Maya understood what her mother had meant, so while the mansion slept, she did not pack. Instead, she waited. She listened to the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the muffled footsteps of the night guard, the hushed sounds of servants moving in the upper floors. When the house finally fell into the deep stillness of midnight, Maya slipped from her room, her steps light, her breath shallow, her heart pounding as though it might betray her with its sound. She moved through corridors she had memorized during her months of service, climbing staircases that groaned under even her light weight, until she reached the east wing. Laya was waiting. Maya knew it before she even opened the door, as if their hearts were tethered. Inside the nursery, the child sat upright on her bed, her doll clutched tightly to her chest. The moment she heard Maya's soft whisper, "Sweetheart, it's me," she broke into quiet sobs and held out her arms. "Maya, I knew you would come," Laya breathed, burying her face into Maya's apron. "I prayed and prayed, and I knew you would come." Maya held her close, rocking her gently as though the entire world had shrunk down to this one small body trembling in her arms. She wanted to tell her that prayers did not always work, that sometimes the world was merciless, but she could not, because in that moment she felt something different, something stirring beyond logic or fear. "My darling," Maya whispered, brushing her lips across Laya's hair. "I came because you need me. And because I believe there is something in you stronger than all the darkness in the world. We just have to find it together." Laya pulled back slightly, her blind eyes shimmering with tears. Do you think I'll ever see?" The question cracked something open in Maya. She wanted to answer carefully, to temper hope with caution, but what spilled from her lips instead was the truth that burned inside her. "I don't know, Laya, but I believe that miracles are born from love, and you are loved more than you know." She reached for the basin of water kept by the window, its surface reflecting faint moonlight. Dipping the cloth, she pressed it again to the child's eyes. But this time it was not only water she offered, it was faith. It was the light her mother had always spoken of, carried through her hands into this fragile soul. For a long while, nothing happened, only silence, the cool cloth against swollen lids and Maya's whispered prayers filling the room. She prayed not in words learned from books, but in the language of her heart, that the child would be freed from fear, that she would know light in whatever form it came, that she would grow into the fullness of the person she was meant to be. Then slowly Laya stirred. Her breathing changed. Her body trembled with something Maya could not explain. The child's small hands lifted, covering Maya's own as if anchoring the moment, and her lips parted in a gasp. "Maya, I see something." Maya's heart leapt, her hands nearly slipping. What do you mean, sweetheart? What do you see? Not shapes. Not colors. Not yet, Laya whispered, her voice filled with wonder and awe. But light. It's there. The dark isn't whole anymore. There's something breaking through. Maya's eyes flooded with tears. She had no proof, no science, no explanation for what was happening. And yet, looking into the child's pale eyes, she believed her. For the first time, she believed something impossible might be unfolding before them. But the miracle, fragile as glass, was interrupted by a voice that cut through the night like a blade. What in God's name is going on here? The nursery door stood open, and in the threshold loomed Charles Remington. His face was a storm, his eyes wide with a fury deeper than any Maya had seen before. His gaze flicked from his servant kneeling by his daughter's bed to Laya's trembling smile. And in an instant, everything inside him hardened. Maya rose slowly, her body trembling, but she placed herself between father and child, her voice steady even as fear threatened to break her. She needed me. She was in pain. And now she feels light, Charles. She feels something new. Don't take this from her. But Charles was beyond reason. His voice roared through the room, shaking the walls. Get out. Out of this house, this instant. Laya clutched at Maya desperately, her small voice piercing the rage. No, Daddy, please. She helped me. She made the light come. Don't take her away. Charles faltered at those words just for a moment. His steel-gray eyes flickered, torn between fury and the possibility that his daughter's claim was true. But pride was a cruel master, and he bowed to it again. Enough, he thundered. This ends now. Maya stood her ground, though her whole body shook. She had crossed every line, defied every order, risked everything, and yet in her heart she knew she could not yield. Not when the impossible was already breaking through the cracks of darkness. This was the moment. The moment that would decide everything. The forbidden touch. The Remington mansion stood like a fortress on the Hudson, a sprawling monument of glass and stone where money bought silence and silence bought control. Inside those walls, every step was measured, every word was weighed, and every smile was practiced. Yet behind the locked nursery door on the east wing, a child's laughter sometimes broke through the order, fragile and fleeting, like sunlight slipping past storm clouds. That child was Leah Remington, 5 years old, blind from birth, and the single thread of softness woven into the otherwise ironclad world of her father, Charles Remington. For all his wealth, for all his dominance in boardrooms and political circles, he could not buy his daughter's sight, and it was this helplessness, this imperfection, that hardened him even more. Charles did not permit strangers near her. He did not permit teachers or doctors unless they came with credentials signed in ink, thicker than blood. Every servant in the mansion had been vetted twice, their histories combed for scandal, their hands tested for steadiness. He told himself this was love, protection. But his love, built of locks and rules, often felt to Leah like a cage. And into that cage stepped Maya Williams. A maid's burden, Maya had not grown up dreaming of mansions. She came from Queens, from a cramped apartment where the walls peeled with dampness and the sound of her mother's cough echoed through the thin ceilings. Her mother, once a nurse herself, had taught Maya that hands were instruments of healing, whether they carried medicine, food, or simply comfort. But when illness struck her mother, Maya had to become both breadwinner and caretaker. So when the agency called with a position at the Remington estate, Maya accepted. She told herself she could endure the cold stares of head housekeeper Mrs. Leeds, the endless polishing of floors already shining, and the constant reminder that she was the help. All that mattered was the paycheck that bought her mother's medication. What Maya had not expected was Laya, the little girl, had wandered into the laundry room on her third day, clutching a stuffed doll missing one eye. She had tilted her head toward Maya's humming, her pale blue irises unfocused but her smile radiant. You sound like sunlight, Laya had whispered. From then on, Maya was more than just another servant in the background. She became a quiet presence in the nursery, folding linens, tidying toys, and humming songs that her mother had once sung. Laya, starved for warmth that wasn't wrapped in caution, leaned toward that presence with all the hunger of a child denied freedom. The moment that changed everything, it began with a complaint, simple, small, and human. Maya, Laya said one afternoon, her voice uncertain. My eyes feel hot, like they're burning. Maya had turned, startled. The girl sat cross-legged on the rug, her fingers gripping her doll so tightly the stitches strained. Her milky eyes blinked rapidly, rimmed with redness. "Oh, sweetheart," Maya murmured, kneeling beside her. "You've been rubbing them too hard. Let me help." She fetched a clean cloth, dipped it into warm water, and wrung it out. Kneeling again, she pressed it gently over Laya's closed lids. The girl sighed, her small shoulders relaxing. "Better?" Maya asked softly. "Yes," Leia whispered. Then after a pause, "It feels like you're washing away the dark." Maya smiled sadly. She didn't correct her, didn't explain that no cloth could undo blindness. She only held the compress steady, letting kindness do what medicine could not. And then, "What the hell are you doing to my daughter's eyes?" The voice cracked through the room like a whip. Maya froze. Standing in the doorway was Charles Remington. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored suit cutting sharper than his words. His eyes, steel gray, cold as winter, locked onto Maya's hands, still pressed against his daughter's face. Laya startled, clutching her doll tight. The room shrank with the weight of his fury. "Sir," Maya began, her voice trembling. "I asked you a question." Charles cut in, stepping forward. "What are you doing to my daughter?" The clash. Maya lowered the cloth slowly, her heart pounding. She said her eyes hurt. "I was only trying to soothe them." "You are not her doctor." His words sliced like glass. "You're not her nanny. You're the help. And no one touches my daughter without permission." "Daddy," Laya blurted, desperate. She didn't mean that, Laya." His tone softened only for her. "Did she touch you without asking?" The child froze. She could feel Maya's fear, the tremble in her breath. She could feel her father's anger like a storm. Between them, she chose the only shield she knew. A lie. "Yes, Daddy," she whispered. She touched me." Maya's stomach dropped. "Laya." But the girl's small face turned downward, her fingers clutching the doll as if it could protect her. Charles's jaw tightened. "You're finished with nursery duty. As of now, you're reassigned to laundry and kitchen. And don't expect full pay this month. I'll be docking your wages for this stunt." Maya's throat tightened. "Please, sir, my mother is ill. I need this job. I don't want excuses." His hand cut the air like a blade. "Next time you're gone. Do I make myself clear?" Maya bit her lip until it bled, nodding because there was nothing else to do. "Good," Charles said, kneeling beside his daughter. "Are you all right, sweetheart? Did she hurt you?" Laya shook her head quickly. "No, Daddy." "Then remember, you must always tell me the truth. I can't protect you otherwise." "Yes, Daddy." Her voice was small, tight with guilt. But the truth she buried deep inside her chest was this: "I lied so you wouldn't yell." Maya's breaking point downstairs. Maya sat in the staff kitchen, her apron crumpled in her lap. The dishwasher hummed behind her, but the noise did nothing to cover the sound of her own quiet sobs. She wrapped her hands around a mug of tea, her fingers trembling. She thought of her mother in Queens, coughing through the night, the bottles of pills lined up like soldiers in retreat. She thought of the rent notice taped to their door. She had taken this job for survival, but tonight survival tasted like humiliation. Maya pressed her palms together, staring at the calluses, the brown skin lined from work. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Our hands carry light, baby. Don't let anyone tell you different." But in this house, light was a forbidden thing. The rest of that evening, the mansion seemed colder than usual to Maya, as if the marble walls themselves whispered judgment. She walked the endless corridors with baskets of linens piled in her arms, her steps muffled against Persian rugs worth more than her entire apartment. Every chandelier gleamed like a reminder of wealth she would never touch, and every passing servant avoided her eyes, as though her clash with Charles had marked her with invisible shame. Yet none of them had been in the nursery. None of them had seen the way Laya's small hand had trembled when she lied to shield her father's anger. That truth alone burned heavier in Maya's chest than all of Charles's scorn. She thought of the little girl often that night, long after she returned to her small windowless room in the basement reserved for the junior staff. The room smelled faintly of bleach from the laundry facilities nearby, and her mattress sagged in the middle, but Maya barely noticed anymore. Instead, she sat at the edge of her bed, the dim lamplight falling across her lap where she held a faded photograph of her mother. In the picture, her mother wore her nurse's uniform and a tired smile, but her eyes still carried fire. That fire was dimmer now, smothered by sickness, but Maya carried it within her like a secret torch. She had promised her mother she would take care of her. She had promised she would not let the world strip away her dignity, no matter how hard it pressed down on them. But promises were hard to keep when the world belonged to men like Charles Remington, who could undo months of struggle with a single wave of his hand. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, Maya dreamed of Laya. She dreamed of a blind child standing in a garden full of light, reaching for flowers she could not see, whispering, "It feels like sunlight." The dream lingered even when Maya awoke before dawn, her heart aching with both fear and determination. She told herself she would endure whatever Charles demanded. She would keep her head down, do her work, and cling to her wages like lifelines. But deep in her chest, another voice whispered, "That child needs more than protection. She needs freedom." Morning arrived with its usual drill-like rhythm. The mansion stirred not with roosters or alarm clocks, but with the hum of kitchen staff preparing elaborate breakfasts, the shuffle of gardeners moving across the estate, and the ever-present echo of Mrs. Leeds's heels as she supervised the staff with military precision. Maya kept to her new assignment, silently scrubbing the kitchen counters and stacking polished silverware into neat rows. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind replayed the previous day's confrontation again and again. Each time she remembered Charles's glare, she felt smaller. Each time she remembered Laya's lie, she felt heavier. It was in that fog of thought that she heard a soft voice from the doorway. "Maya?" Her head snapped up. There she was, Laya. Dressed in a pale yellow dress, her dark hair tied with ribbons, her doll tucked under her arm. She stood uncertainly at the threshold of the kitchen, her blank eyes tilted toward the sound of Maya's breathing. Mrs. Leeds, who had been inspecting a tray of pastries, stiffened. "Miss Remington, the kitchen is not for you. Your breakfast will be served upstairs." "I want Maya," Laya interrupted softly, her fingers clutching her doll tighter. Maya's breath caught. She glanced at Mrs. Leeds, who pursed her lips in disapproval, then at the child, whose face carried both innocence and defiance. It was dangerous for Laya to seek her out, dangerous for Maya to respond, but how could she deny the girl? "Good morning, sweetheart," Maya said gently, forcing her hands to remain steady on the cloth she was folding. "What are you doing down here?" "I wanted to say sorry," Laya whispered, her voice almost lost in the clatter of dishes. "For yesterday." The words pierced through Maya's chest like a blade wrapped in silk. She wanted to sweep the child into her arms, to tell her she had nothing to apologize for. But she knew the walls had ears. She knew Charles's shadow lingered even when he wasn't present. "It's all right," Maya said softly, careful to keep her tone neutral, like she was speaking of nothing more important than the weather. "You didn't do anything wrong." But Laya shook her head. "I did, I lied. And Daddy believed me." Her blind eyes filled with something heavy, something too old for her small face. "I didn't want him to yell at you." For a long moment, Maya forgot to breathe. She glanced at Mrs. Leeds, who had turned away but whose stiff shoulders betrayed her disapproval. The housekeeper would report this later, Maya was sure, but she couldn't let the child carry this guilt. "You were just trying to keep the peace," Maya murmured, lowering her voice so only Laya could hear. "That doesn't make you bad. It makes you brave." Laya's lips trembled into a fragile smile. "Can I sit with you for a little while?" Mrs. Leeds cleared her throat sharply. "Miss Remington, your father will not approve." "Then don't tell him," Laya said, her chin lifting with surprising resolve for a 5-year-old. "Please, Mrs. Leeds, just 5 minutes." The housekeeper hesitated. Rules were the marrow of this mansion, and breaking them was unthinkable. Yet even she, stern and loyal as she was, could not entirely resist the child's plea. She sighed, muttering something about it being only this once, before sweeping from the kitchen to attend to other matters. As soon as her footsteps faded, Laya crossed the tiled floor, feeling her way cautiously until she bumped against Maya's apron. Maya bent quickly, steadying her. The little girl's small hands clung to hers, warm and trusting. "I missed you," Laya whispered, leaning against her. "The house feels quieter without your songs." Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to tell the child that she had missed her too, more than she should have, but instead she said softly, "I'll always be near." even if you can't see me. Laya tilted her head, her pale eyes searching. Do you think someday I will see? The question settled like a stone in Maya's stomach. She thought of all the doctors who had come and gone, of Charles's endless checks to specialists across the world, of the way each left shaking their heads with polite apologies. She wanted to tell Laya the truth, but how could she crush that fragile hope? I don't know, sweetheart, Maya said honestly. But I do know this. Even without sight, you already see more than most people ever will. You see with your heart. Laya smiled faintly, resting her cheek against Maya's hand. That's what you sound like. A heart that sees. And in that moment, Maya realized something dangerous, something she had not allowed herself to think until now. This child was not just her employer's daughter. She was not just another task on a duty list. She was a soul reaching for light, and Maya could not turn away. The encounter in the kitchen should have ended there, a fleeting moment quickly swallowed by the mansion's endless routines. But the truth is that moments like those cling to the air long after they pass. The mansion itself seemed to remember, carrying the echo of Laya's whispered apology and Maya's quiet reassurance into every hallway. When Maya returned to her duties, her heart still trembled with the memory of the child's blind gaze fixed so earnestly on her, as if she were the only person in the world who could be trusted. It terrified Maya. To be needed in such a way was both a gift and a dangerous responsibility, especially under the roof of Charles Remington, whose rules were written in stone and enforced with the weight of his wealth. Yet despite her fear, Maya felt something stirring inside her, something she had not allowed herself to feel since her mother first fell ill. Purpose. As the day unfolded, she tried to bury that feeling beneath chores. She polished the silver until it gleamed like captured moonlight. She carried laundry baskets up and down staircases that seemed to stretch forever. She scrubbed spotless tiles as though she could erase her own mistakes along with the grime. But no matter how hard she worked, the memory of Laya's small hands clinging to hers kept returning, refusing to be silenced. For Maya, the girl was no longer just an assignment she had been briefly trusted with. She was now a fragile bond she could not bring herself to sever. And so every clink of cutlery, every folded sheet, every measured step through the mansion's grand halls carried the weight of a secret vow. She would not let that child feel alone, even if it cost her. Charles, meanwhile, moved through the estate with the same restless energy that drove his business empire. His footsteps were heavy, his commands brisk, his eyes always scanning for flaws. But though he buried himself in meetings and calls, he was not untouched by what had transpired. When he looked at his daughter at dinner that evening, her pale eyes lowered and her appetite faint, something inside him stirred uncomfortably. He told himself it was anger at Maya's audacity, fear that anyone would dare to touch his child without permission. But deep down, beneath layers of control and calculation, another truth pressed against him. Laya was slipping further into a world he could not enter. For all his wealth, he could not give her sight, and for all his power, he could not keep her from longing for voices other than his own. That night, long after Laya had been put to bed and the mansion quieted, Charles stood outside her room listening to her soft humming through the door. He recognized the melody. It was the same tune he had heard from Maya's lips when she worked. The realization struck him with a mix of fury and helplessness. His daughter was clinging to a servant's song, not his. He clenched his fists, telling himself he would not allow it. His daughter's trust must remain with him and him alone. But when he opened the door and saw her curled up with her doll, humming softly to comfort herself, he could not bring himself to scold her. Instead, he sat at her bedside and whispered, "You're my whole life. Laya, don't forget that." She nodded sleepily, but even half asleep. Her small hand searched the air as if looking for someone else's presence. He tucked her in tightly, but the unease stayed with him long after he left the room. For Maya, the days that followed were a careful balancing act between obedience and defiance. She obeyed Charles's orders, keeping to the laundry and kitchen, never stepping into the nursery uninvited. She kept her head lowered in Mrs. Leeds's presence, aware that the housekeeper watched her with hawk-like suspicion. Yet whenever Laya managed to slip away from her attendants and find her, whether in the kitchen, the laundry hall, or the garden path, Maya's resolve faltered. Each time the girl reached for her hand, and each time Maya could not deny her. Their conversations were brief, often stolen between footsteps or whispers, but in those stolen minutes they built a world of their own. Laya would ask what colors looked like, and Maya would describe them not with the dry words of science but with the poetry of experience. Blue like the sky when it stretches forever, red like warmth against your skin, green like laughter running through the grass. Laya would listen with parted lips as though each description were a treasure, but with every secret moment came risk, and risk was something Maya could ill afford. Already she had seen the tightening of Mrs. Leeds's mouth when she found Laya near the kitchen again. Already she had felt the weight of Charles's gaze when he entered a room where Maya happened to be standing too close to his daughter. The danger was growing even as the bond deepened. Maya knew she should distance herself for both their sakes. Yet when she lay in bed at night, the image that came to her was always the same. A blind child whispering, "It feels like sunlight." The turning point came one late afternoon when the house was unusually still. Most of the staff were occupied with preparations for a grand dinner Charles was hosting for his business associates, and Maya had been sent to the garden to fetch fresh herbs. She moved among the trimmed hedges and marble fountains, grateful for the open air. When she heard the sound of small feet crunching on gravel, she turned, startled, and there was Laya, her yellow dress brushing against the hedges as she followed the sound of Maya's footsteps. "Maya," the child called softly. "Laya." Maya rushed forward, heart pounding. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be out here alone." "I heard your steps," Laya said simply, holding out her hands. "I knew it was you." Maya hesitated, torn between fear of discovery and the undeniable pull of the child's trust. Finally she knelt and took Laya's hands in hers. The girl's face tilted upward, her blind eyes filled with that strange mix of innocence and wisdom that always seemed older than her years. "Do you know why I came?" Laya whispered. "Why?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "Because when you touched my eyes that day, it didn't hurt. It felt better, warmer, like something was opening." Maya's breath caught. "Laya, please," the child begged, clutching her hands. "Do it again." The words hung in the air, dangerous and impossible. Maya knew if Charles ever discovered this, her life at the mansion would end instantly. Yet how could she deny the plea of a child who had known nothing but darkness and rules? She wanted to refuse, to tell Laya it was too dangerous, but instead she found herself reaching for the handkerchief in her apron, dipping it into the cool water of the fountain, and pressing it gently against the girl's closed lids. And in that moment, as sunlight filtered through the leaves and the sound of the fountain whispered in the background, something unexplainable stirred. Laya exhaled softly, as though a weight she had carried all her life had been lifted, if only slightly. "It feels like light," she whispered again, her voice trembling with wonder. Maya's heart raced. She did not know what this meant, did not know if it was real or only the child's imagination. All she knew was that she had crossed an invisible line, one from which there was no return.